And now we cross over to our Young for global insights and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks very much, Woo-kyung. It's now time for Global Insight, where we connect with experts from around the world to hear their views on issues making headlines. Geopolitical anxiety continues to brew in East Asia amid ever-growing tensions between the United States and China, most recently escalated by Beijing's military planes flying near Taiwanese airspace. Doubts surrounding the stability of China's massive property market has also been a source of concern, as defaults made by the heavily indebted sector could potentially destabilise China's financial system. We discuss these geopolitical and economic concerns surrounding China and whether the pressure will cause the authoritarian regime to tighten its grip on state affairs and reinforce its wolf warrior tactics. Today we speak with James Palmer, Deputy Editor of Foreign Policy magazine. It's lovely to have you on the show, James. How are you today?
Very well, thank you.
Right, it's great to have you with us. And, well, to go straight into the questions, China's shown increasing aggressiveness towards Taiwan in recent weeks. And, well, it flew a record number of fighter planes in skies near the island, and it's constantly talked about forced reunification. Why has it become so pushy in recent weeks?
Well, there's several reasons. The first is that it was China's National Week. So there was a need for sort of more display, more pushing of the lines. It's also a very tense political atmosphere in China at the moment. And when politics gets tense in China, it means that individual careers are in danger. And everybody has this need to justify themselves. And the easiest way to justify yourself is by these kind of nationalistic performances. And that even includes, the People's Liberation Army. So even these generals, these officers are taking part in these kind of displays of performative patriotism, which in the case of the army is even more dangerous than with wolf warrior diplomats, because it means, actually these sort of border touching, like military displays, the intrusions into the ADIZ. And this brings with it, consequent risk. But there's no penalty in the Chinese system for getting nationalistic on Taiwan. There's nothing holding you back. You're always effectively going to be rewarded within the system for these kind of displays of aggression.
And well, China's recent antics, it's triggered a lot of nervousness around what's happened, especially among Taiwanese officials who have expressed concern that there could be war and some kind of miscalculation, even a military conflict due to such miscalculations. And well, the question is how far China will go to assert its claim over Taiwan.
I think we're unlikely to see, even an accidental war, because a war with Taiwan on China's part requires an enormous amount of preparation, of massing of forces, all these things that would be very visible. And while we've seen, these long-term infrastructure buildups and so on, we haven't seen the kind of concentration of forces that would be necessary. Now, it's possible that you could have a small-scale conflict, exchange of fire, so on, which would have created a very dangerous situation afterwards. But I don't think that we're going to blunder into war. And if you look at the polling of the Taiwanese public, they're worried, but they're not panicked. They've been through these kind of crises before, in the early 2000s and so forth, and they know that this normally calms down. I think the real worry is what Beijing's intentions are in the sort of mid to long term, when the possibility of invasion is looking, more and more likely by, I would say, the mid-2020s or the end of the decade.
And James, there are also questions surrounding the US's role in this. Do you think it's going to maintain its policy of strategic ambiguity?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I don't think any US administration would abandon that, because on the one hand, if you commit to Taiwan and end up not backing it up, you had this massive loss of face for the US and globally, and even that commitment worsens tensions in the first place. But you also want China to believe that the US might well intervene. So maintaining that ambiguity, like just what action the US would take in the event of Chinese invasion, is really critical. And a lot of the US positioning is always about trying to walk that line, trying to make sure that Beijing thinks that the US will intervene, that the US can act as a deterrent to Chinese invasion without ever actually explicitly saying it will.
And in recent weeks, we've heard a lot about China's financial woes as well with the Evergrande crisis, this huge $300 billion debt crisis that China's second largest developer is facing. And well, many say that this really pales in comparison to China's $8.2 trillion debt bubble with the country's outstanding local government financing vehicles, of course, which apparently amounts to roughly 52% of its GDP, according to estimates by Goldman Sachs. How precarious is China's financial system?
It's very risky at the moment, and things could go bad at any time. What they're trying to do at the moment, I think, is just kick the can down the road again. These debts have been building up for years, but we've seen this explosion of real estate debt, in particular since 2016, when the real estate sector ran up $3 trillion in debt alone. So Evergrande's, 300 million is only a fraction of that. But these issues have been building up since the late 1990s, since there were changes in the way that local government got their revenue, which caused them to start leaning very heavily on land sales. And we've just seen this kind of piling up and up and up, and it being constantly delayed to any kind of reckoning with it. Now, the government has been trying to impose some kind of restraints on the sector, to impose these 3 red lines that govern how much debt you can take on, all this kind of thing. But it's really not been successful so far. Over 50% of municipalities have missed the 3 red lines marker, and the government is really struggling, the central government is really struggling to try and keep this debt under limits and to contain the real estate sector without collapsing it.
Certainly seems like authorities have been doing their best to really dampen all this speculation over investing in the property market. But well, recently, from private tutors to online gaming and the mining of cryptocurrencies, it seems that Beijing authorities are cracking down on all sorts of economic activities. And well, why?
So there's a couple of reasons. Specifically, you have a panic over young people. There's been worries for a long time that young people are not productive enough, not masculine enough, not committed enough to the party. Those go back, 10 or 15 years. You have all this language around, masculinity, around Chinese young men needing to be powerful, to be strong, not having strong enough bodies. It's quite creepy stuff. But it's become very intense in the last couple of years because the demographic figures are so dire. They lifted the one-child policy a few years ago, lifted the two-child policy this year. In theory, you can have as many kids as you want now, but in practice, nobody is having extra kids. There's been no baby boom. And so not only do you have them staring down the barrel of fewer and fewer people, that's created intense anxieties about just who are these kids that we do have? What's their quality? Are they committed? Have they become soft because of the West? And so a lot of this crackdown has focused on things that affect young people, like online gaming, like private tutoring, where you have this combination of trying to stop the sort of intense race over tuition spending, but also this crackdown on any kind of Western education, any kind of foreign textbooks, all this kind of thing. So this attempt to create a kind of, work-focused, masculine, uninfluenced by foreign ideas group of young people. But then on top of that, you have this desire by Xi to reassert party control across the economy, to really put the party front and center in everything. There's this perception, I think, that in the 2000s, which in many ways Xi is reacting against, corruption ran so out of control because these private sectors were given kind of full, free reign. But not just corruption, any kind of power, any concentration of sort of cultural capital, social capital in other sectors is seen by the party as an inherent threat to itself. And so you had, the takedown of Jack Ma because he was becoming effectively too popular a figure. Alibaba was becoming too ubiquitous a platform. But mixed into this in turn are all these, real worries, these legitimate concerns over the extent of, the use of people's personal data, over the rush to kind of opt to online finance that's seen a bunch of Ponzi schemes and other such measures erupt. And so you have these ideological concerns mixed in with these real regulatory worries that have created this atmosphere of kind of total, crackdown. And I think we're going to see a lot of kind of paralysis as a result.
And well, given these social demographic changes and also these changes in the economy, it does seem that the regime is sensing this need for social reform, which it has been emphasizing in recent years. And while China also says it will become more global and continue to expand its Belt and Road Initiative projects, and it's also launched its own biodiversity initiatives. At the same time, it's unclear whether President Xi Jinping is going to join COP26 happening next week. Do you think China is going to continue to build up its own model of globalism and multilateralism with Chinese characters, or how do you think it's going to respond to Western pressure?
I think that we're going to see China becoming more insular and its demands on the rest of the world through its power more extreme. So, Belt and Road has mostly been a failure. We see these big numbers thrown around, but you've had multiple competing projects, you've had bankruptcies, these huge kind of initiatives that were supposed to materialize just haven't. What has happened is that China has started to make more demands over the speech of countries involved in Belt and Road projects, trying to get them on board to condemn attempts to speak out about the atrocities committed about the Uyghur, for instance, to force them to censor their own media while possible. So I think you have this, at the one time, this country that's becoming more insular, more hostile to the world, and at the same time is deeply desires to impose its will upon the world where it can.
Well, Presidents Joe Biden and Xi Jinping, they're set to meet before the year is up. What do you think they'll talk about? What will top the agenda? And do you think they can actually make any kind of meaningful progress on improving relations?
I don't think we'll see any meaningful progress. I mean, we almost never do from these kind of meetings. Where there is meaningful US-China's diplomacy is mostly conducted at a level below the leadership, sort of the level of, the smart diplomats and regulatory types. And even then, the overwhelming fact is always Chinese domestic concerns. You get these figures who are portrayed as being, having been friendly to the West in the past, but that was mostly because the times were more friendly to the West. And now we see them taking on more hardline poses, more hardline actions. So I think it'll be, 30 minutes of pleasantries and some kind of exchange of banal restatements of everybody's position over Taiwan, over trade and so on. I don't think we'll see anything important come from that summit.
And in the meantime, the United States Build Back Better World Infrastructure Initiative and Europe's own Global Gateway Strategy, they're designed to counter China's infrastructure network, the BRI that you mentioned. Do you think they're going to work in the long run, though? I mean, you can't ignore the years and years of Chinese effort that have really posed an alternative to sort of Western ideology and economic development model.
Well, I think that, firstly, neither of these projects has anything concrete behind it at the moment. They're entirely talk. And you've had this kind of panic sparked in Washington and Brussels by the Belt and Road Initiative that isn't really justified by its success or its numbers. Spending on Chinese foreign investment didn't go up at any faster rate during the years of Belt and Road. What you had was a political project that had Xi's stamp on it. And so all these Chinese firms rushed to say that they were part of it. But if you look at things like the actual trade routes that were supposed to be the key part of the Belt and Road, they've been failures. And so I think it's probably sensible for the West to, take a breath, look at where China has been successful and where it hasn't, rather than try and rush to these big grand projects against this imaginary sort of Marshall Plan style project that keeps being talked up as China's doing. Instead, just think about where can we smartly apply cultural, economic pressure against China? Where can we offer a realistic alternative to Chinese loans, Chinese funding, and so on, without compromising our own values? Because the appeal of Chinese money in a lot of cases is that it comes without those tricky strings of human rights and union conditions and industrial and worries about the supply chain attached. But on the other hand, it's increasingly coming with political demands from the Chinese end. And I think those turning those against China, pointing out the unacceptability of these kind of demands that China is making, may be more effective than just throwing money at the problem.
Well, I'm afraid this is all we have time for today. That was James Palmer, Deputy Editor of Foreign Policy magazine. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.